and Control C. Hello everyone, my name is Delzar Slit, and today we're doing a reaction video to a Trope Talk. So, you know it's OSB, and this video is on personifying death. Now, personally, I have a couple different characters because I've just written some bullshit. None of it's gonna ever get published, more than likely. But I have my own personified death characters, multiple, more than 10. But some of them are in different canons, but most of them are in one canon. Anyways, I want to know what they're going to say about this, or at least what the literary history of this is. Anyways, let's begin.
There are a surprisingly small number of truly universal human experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from the short list of being born, eating food, and
Yes.
having a strong opinion on the best Star Trek captain, the one thing
I don't have an opinion on. Actually, I was going to say I don't have a strong opinion, but I think my strong opinion is that I haven't watched Star Trek. So, is that a strong opinion?
everybody will eventually have in common is the
So
one
there is no
experience
good
no
Star
reliable
Trek
witness
captain.
has ever adequately described: death. If you'll pardon the morbidity, although in my defense you did choose to click on this video, death is something that we all face eventually. And the fact is, most of us brush up against its consequences long before we ever deal with it ourselves. It's a tragedy, an inevitability, and a very frequent theme to explore in fiction, because creative types have a tendency to
It's always sad when someone you know becomes an it. Yeah.
memento their mori with slightly alarming frequency, and it's not too surprising that themes of death work their way into an awful lot of art. It's a time-honored tradition to process grief by working through the big feelings in a creative medium, and that means we get a lot of stories where the writer is grappling with at least one serious loss, or sipping from a cocktail of existential emotions ranging from dread to sorrow to contemplation to celebration. After all, you can't ponder death for long without also thinking about life. One rather interesting way this can manifest is the trope we'll be discussing today, the concept of personifying death. Anthropomorphic personification is one of humanity's first and favorite tools. When in doubt about how to handle a particularly mysterious concept, the first thing we tend to do is give it a face and a voice and try to tackle it like an equal. Fables, legends, morality tales, from a certain standpoint, even gods fall under this umbrella. Come up with characters to represent and explore the world around you, and an unknowable universe becomes a storybook. And when we look at something as complicated and nebulous as the concept of death, historically we've jumped at the chance to give it a face and a voice too. Personifications of death are some of the oldest stories we have, and they come in a few flavors, ranging from rulers of the underworld and keepers of the dead like Ereshkigal, Izanami, King Yama, Hela, Hades, and Persephone.
I'm decent, and we're in the middle of a video about quite literal, talking about death. So things may get morbid depending, but at the same time, I hope you enjoy. As to how I am currently, that's a question I don't. Nah, fuck it. We chase death and we bite the bullet. Um, we, I, not we. I was going to say we are okay, but I am okay. There is no we here. It is just me. Um, I'm good. Mentally, I don't know. But I think that's fair for everyone. I think everyone has something that they're grappling with in the background, and I will deal with that when I'm off stream.
Persephone, to psychopomps that guide the dead, like Hermes, Anubis, the Anku, and Azrael, to actual personifications of death itself, like Thanatos or the fourth horseman of the apocalypse. The lines between these categories can get a little bit wibbly, but broadly there's a lot of different ways to take the existential mystery that is death and turn it into a character that we can get a handle on. Some of them are dispassionate, others cruel, some are helpful or even kind. The only consistency across death's many faces is its inevitability. Outside of that, it really depends on how the writer thinks of it. And bluntly, this isn't something most people like to think about very much. When it comes to our ability to grasp existential concepts, death is simultaneously weirdly easy and weirdly hard. On the one hand, it's pretty much the only guaranteed experience anyone gets, so you'd think that would be a leg up, but it's also notoriously poorly documented. We don't have the answers about it that we wish we had. No eyewitness accounts, no clear communication from beyond the grave, and broadly, we are pretty bad at comprehending the concept of a cessation of existence, whether that's something as vast as a human life or something as basic as a building you used to go to. The way our memories work is kind of an eternal present. When recalled, they feel very close to us, even if the actual event they're recalling is very old.
Yeah.
Intellectually, we know something or someone might be gone, but emotionally, it doesn't feel that way. We don't stop remembering things just because they don't exist anymore. If anything, that just makes us remember them even harder. Our brains seem almost unwilling to accept that anything can be gone, and will instead usually interpret it as far away or just not here right now, which also seems to be why
You have
we
a decent amount of
experience
time, so
things
you're just
like
chilling here?
nostalgia, or
Nice!
find ourselves confused and disoriented when revisiting an old location that used to be familiar but has since been changed by the natural progression of life. It's weird to us when the closeness of our memories and the closeness of reality don't line up with each other, and if we were better emotionally at accepting that things change and end, this probably wouldn't stress us out so much.
I don't understand this because I understand that everything ends and that everyone goes. Why is everyone else worried about things when they are coming and leaving? Just accept that the fucking Reaper's coming for your ass. Sit the fuck down, take a breath, and hold still. It'll be over. Yes, I know for a fact that no one else shares my damn opinion on that, which is weird to me because I'm going, why are y'all stressed? If the shit comes, it comes.
All that to say, this is a heavy subject.
Mm-hmm.
Arguably the heaviest. This is something that is, at its most basic level, difficult for us to emotionally understand or accept. We pretty much only face it on the worst days of our lives, and because of that, it
Yeah.
almost always hurts. We generally avoid things that hurt us, which means a lot of people, very reasonably, don't really think about death until they're forced to confront it. But the good thing about all this is that this truly is a universal concept, which means
Mm-hmm.
none of us are facing it alone. People have been trying to make sense of it for tens of thousands of years, and their conclusions have outlived them. We have a lot to work with here, and even if it's a sad story, it's one where
Do not stand by my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I am thousands of winds that blow. I am the diamond glints in the snow. I am the sunlight on a ripened grain. I am a gentle autumn rain. As you awake with morning's hush, I am the swift, upflinging rush of quiet birds in circling flight. I am the day transcending night. Do not stand by my grave and cry. I am there, not there. I did not die. I just read that, thought I could come out of it and not be a little bit in the deepened mood. I'm not exactly. Nah, fuck it. I'm ready to keep going. Let's go.
all telling together, and the more we make sense of it, the less frightening it becomes. So when it comes to personifying the concept of death as a character, there's a little bit of subdivision here. There are personifications of death that are guides to death, which are basically mythological psychopomps. These are people whose job it is to guide the dead and dying to a final destination of some sort that represents actual death. These guys are not themselves embodiments of death, but instead simply do a job directly related to death, and are correspondingly total wildcards in the character department and can have basically any personality or day job, because being a guide to the souls of the dead is a thing they do and not a thing they are. Some of these characters are cheerful goofballs, some are noble, powerful warriors, some are absolute weirdos, and most of them are at least kind of immortal. These stories don't usually have much to say about death as a whole, although in some stories they do kind of demystify the process. If the afterlife is just a place that characters can go to and come out of again, which isn't always the case in these stories, but is rather common when psychopomps take center stage, the mystery gets a little stripped away. Characters that are dead have just gone somewhere else that these guys can go to, a real proverbial farm upstate. These stories don't really tackle the existential questions so much as they provide a fictional answer. When someone dies, they cleanly go from point A to point B, helped along by character C. These guys are surprisingly common in anime, where being pals with a Shinigami is one of the easiest ways to wind up with superpowers. Slightly similar in concept, but wildly different in personality, we find the death-adjacent assholes. These characters are antagonistic to downright villainous, typically very powerful with a lot of control over death, and they're generally in favor of it, usually because they get something out of it, like
I have
power
one of these
or
in my
a
own
prolonged
canon.
lifespan of their own.
God damn it.
And crucially, they're dicks. These beings might call themselves loves death, but really their only gimmick is just regular killing people and occasionally getting some kind of evil power-up from it, which is just one rung up the basic bitch villain ladder from tying girls to railroad tracks. Death-adjacent assholes make great antagonists because their motivation is incredibly simple, and that leaves a lot of room for personality and vibes. Much like the classic pure evil villain, with these guys lack in personal complexity, they make up for in style, hateability, and raw destructive power. And because they aren't real death, it's also possible for our heroes to actually defeat them without triggering massive cosmological consequences. But much like the Guides to Death, these dudes don't exactly make much of a statement about the existential ramifications they initially appear to represent. Guides to Death and death-adjacent assholes are not death itself, they just work with it, and so neither one necessarily requires all that much pondering on the part of the writer. And as a result, neither of these guys tend to be found in the same stories that feature a literal death, a being that personifies death itself. When someone dies, this character is who they deal with, the be-all, end-all. They're the end of the story, a neutral fact of existence. Their personality tends to be on the spectrum between subdued and actively antagonistic, and they might initially appear harsh and cruel, but it usually becomes clear eventually that they're actually pretty chill, potentially even kind and compassionate.
I'm realizing that I have all three of these so far mentioned types in a story that I was working on called Hell's Gambit. Yes, I'm gonna ramble as fuck off right now. Okay, so if you're wondering to watch this video unchecked, you should have just watched the original video. It'll be in the link in the description. Go over there and watch it now. Okay, so for Psychopomps, I have multiple Reapers, which I actually named them Debria for their classification as angels. But we have multiple Death Gods, three of them in fact. One of them, each one represents a different type of death: peaceful, violent, and inevitable. Okay, inevitability is inevitable death is old age. Meanwhile, violence is obviously like homicide, getting murdered, and peaceful death, well, suicide. Yeah, that. Which one of them is the strongest in the head death? Suicide. Why is she peaceful death? Because if you do not wish to live on as you are, you can just make a prayer and go. Anyways, really nice, chill way of getting the fuck out of situations that are not good. Anyways, that's the thing, right? Yeah. What the fuck is it? Where was I going with this? I also have actual literal death, the concept itself. And if you're wondering, did all these things exist at the same time? No, they all existed and came after one another. Quite literally in the opposite order of how I described them just now. Actual death came first, and it did all jobs. There was no afterlife. When the second gods, like the actual gods, came up into the heavens and made an afterlife, those are when death gods became a thing. From there, death only had to kill, and these gods managed the dead instead. And now, there are reapers who then take said people and guide them to the death gods who will then manage them. So I do disagree. You can have all these different entities.
Passionate. Stories that personify death itself usually conclude that death doesn't need to be a jerk or a villain. They can just
Yeah,
be,
no, they don't need to be an
waiting at
asshole.
the end of the story whenever it's time to close the book. These embodiments of death often actually really like people because they've had a lot of time to get to know and appreciate them, and if they fill an antagonistic role, it's usually because they have a reason to oppose the main characters that they aren't ready to accept yet. They don't tend to be evil, they can just be kind of scary and sad to think about. And when a story is about death, it is also inevitably about life. When a story features a true personification of death, a characterization of the end of all stories, that story is going to be making some kind of statement about the nature of death, and thus by extension what it means to be alive. In stories where literal death is the antagonist, of which there are a good few, the arc of the story is almost never about the protagonist defeating or escaping them, although it usually takes the protagonist a while to accept that. It's about how a protagonist obsessed with their oncoming death is depriving themselves of a chance to really live, and that the protagonist doesn't have to overcome a fact of existence, they have to overcome their own fear of it. And it makes sense that this is a common conclusion for stories to draw. Confronting one's own mortality mortality is a weird double edged sword. It's a scary and unhappy thought that directs us to ask ourselves things like, would I be content if the story ended right here, right now? Which is a
Yes.
question that often stirs up painful regrets or dissatisfaction. But when we come back to reality and see that the story isn't ending right here and now, there's a couple ways we can go. We might respond to that blend of bad feelings by running from them and what they represent, trying to prolong our lives as much as possible. And running is a natural response to any fear. But we can also do something healthier and shift into a new perspective on life and how we can move forward spending it in a way we're happy with. In stories where the character starts off running from death, they're liable to realize that if their only goal in life is to not die, they're just meeting the bare minimum definition of being alive and they're missing their chance to use their life for anything more interesting.
Can we just agree that the fucking Puss in Boots movie was phenomenal in every single capacity of a way to describe it? I'm sorry, I was just like, I'm looking at this, I'm like, yep, 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 yep. I think you're just making a Puss in Boots diatribe at this point. Not a diatribe, because this doesn't have two characters, because if Red and if Blue was here as well, it would be a very different video. Because then we would go over the locations of all these different places as well. But that would actually be pretty interesting, actually, now that I think about it. But nope, go back into the video. Okay, so that would be interesting, but it isn't what we're doing now. Where was I going? Fuck. Doesn't matter. We'll get back into this later.
But this characterization of death is very simple. As a personification, it basically just puts a face to a garden variety existential crisis. All the focus is still put on the mortal protagonist figuring out how to process and accept it. These literal deaths can still be fun, but their actual role in the story is a little bit sexy lamp-ish. They could be replaced by an inanimate deadly threat and serve ultimately the same purpose in the protagonist's character development. But this is not the only role a literal death can play. Some writers, notably Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, let death be a main character, and a damn interesting one at that. Making literal death a focus character with their own arc and stories is a challenge, because it's hard to let them be existential death, a universal concept that spans the scale from cellular to stellar, as well as a person with agency and things they want, which is kind of necessary to make them a functional character in a story.
Yeah.
It's hard to reconcile these two wildly different.
Okay, so first off, I've seen that comic before, but never actually had the chance to read it. I really want to, just haven't gone out of my way to do it.
Forms of characterization without one of them hindering the other. But some stories pull it off, and these stories often come from people who seem to have done a lot of musing on the subject and have gotten past a lot of the grief and the hurt that surrounds this idea, leaving only a fact of existence that they explore from every angle. So let's spend the rest of this video talking about death from the Discworld. For those of you who've missed out on it, the short of it is that Discworld is a fantasy series written by Sir Terry Pratchett. It's got over 40 books in it, and while it started off as a satire of sword and sorcery genre staples, it quickly developed into its own world that explored its own comedic nuances with growing sincerity. In the Discworld series, literal actual death is a recurring character, and after his first few appearances where Pratchett was clearly still figuring him out, he's consistently a deeply compassionate figure who finds mortals fascinating, wonderful, and well worth caring for, in large part because he sees so many of them, admittedly usually on their worst and most depressing days. He cameos in a lot of the books because he's capital D death, so anytime a character dies he turns up to collect them, or sometimes just has a near protagonist experience if they come particularly close to biting it, but there are also books that are just about him as the main character, one of which is Reaper Man, where Death spends most of the book forcibly retired by the lawful neutral auditors of the universe that didn't like that he was developing a personality. He goes to live out his last days working on a farm, living among humans as a beloved oddball, and even saving a few lives. The collective unconsciousness of humanity eventually replaces him with a more classical Death with a skeleton horse, a crown and corresponding power complex, and worst of all, a sense of theatrics. During their final showdown, Death's own existence is preserved for a few vital seconds by a new friend's heroic sacrifice, and he uses that time to destroy the new Death before going to make his case before the greatest death of all, the death of universes. He says that death has to care about the lives it ends, because what can the harvest hope for if not for the care of the Reaper Man? This isn't the only Discworld story where Death's deep love of life.
That is such a good fucking message. What the hell? That's like actually sad. Also, death kills death. That's fucking awesome. Yeah.
life comes to center stage. In Hogfather, a very affectionate Christmas parody where the auditors try to assassinate fantasy Santa Claus, Death, currently filling in for the jolly old elf in question while his granddaughter does the legwork of actually saving Christmas, bums straight into The Little Match Girl, a classic tale of a young girl freezing to death. Death is informed that this story is meant to be festive because it reminds people to be grateful for the things they have, and Death disagrees, saving the girl's life, which is not something he could normally do, but is something he can do while pulling double duty as the spirit of the holiday season, because the Hogfather gives presents, and there's no greater present than a future, which is something that Death would know intimately. But Discworld's Death is not omnipotent, and more importantly, he's not actually nice. One of his more complicated moments comes in a book some years before Hogfather called Soul Music. You might have noticed that I mentioned he had a granddaughter and wondered how that happened. The short of it is Death adopted a daughter, and then later took an apprentice. The apprentice and the daughter hit it off, and when the apprentice inevitably beefed it at the whole being Death thing, he and Death's daughter were sent out of Death's timeless domain to live human lives together. They had a daughter named Susan, and then as the inciting incident in Soul Music, their carriage has a terrible accident and they both die, leaving Susan behind. The problem complicating this standard issue tragic backstory is that Death is a character, and that means in a very real way, Susan's parents are dead because her grandfather killed them. The idea that haunts her throughout the book is that he could have done something, and the truth he freely admits is that yes, he could have done something, but they wanted to be human, not immortal, and that meant this had to happen sometime, because that's what he is.
I love this. Okay, so first off, if you choose to have been like, if you have the ability to choose to be mortal or immortal, and you choose to be human, and you also chose, like, these are your choices. Yeah, like, I can't blame him at all. I am Death. I do not make excuses.
And he doesn't even seem all that broken up about it, except no, he absolutely is. It makes him so sad he goes on sabbatical trying to find a way to get drunk enough to forget what he's done. And Susan gets cosmologically roped into doing his job instead because someone has to do the job of the inevitable. Death himself mourns the loss of his loved ones and struggles to reconcile his own inevitability and the choices they made with how much it hurts him to lose the people he loves. By the end of the story, Susan and Death have successfully saved the day by blackmailing the indomitable spirit of rock and roll. It makes sense in context. And Susan has gained a much deeper understanding of what exactly Death can and can't do, leading them to reconcile and essentially find a way to grieve together. It's a pretty uncontroversial take that Discworld's Death is one of the best written deaths in all fiction, and if you disagree, that's cool, pistols at dawn and I won't need any backup, but these are
So, first off, the way that you've summed him up and basically told this story read, there is no way in the world that I would ever want to argue with you. But at the same time, I love my own Death characters, and I will not bastardize them by giving them anything less than perfection. Although I know that my art is not perfect. So I will calmly place all of my Death characters at number 2 and not have to shoot red, but at the same time, bring your pistol, motherfucker.
Stories that are uniquely powerful because they unravel and explore the ramifications of letting Death be both a cold inevitability and a person with feelings. He comes across as simultaneously deeply alien and trying his absolute best, both distant from humanity and loving it very profoundly. Every time someone else tries to take on the job of Death, they always try to bend and break the rules so that only the people they don't like die, only the people they think deserve it, and the people that they think deserve life get to live. Death himself never struggles with this, or at least never succumbs to that desire, because Death understands that there has to be a law, and he has to be impartial. There's a nature of things, and he slots into it. And all the mortals that take on his job, Susan and Susan's father, they all struggle with this very strongly, because they are human, and Death, for all of his wonderful character traits, is not. Terry Pratchett said he would sometimes get letters from people who were terminally ill, who hoped that Terry's version was the one they were going to meet. He said that those letters would leave him staring at the wall for quite some time. And to be upfront, that makes me really sad.
Imagine.
This whole thing breaks my heart in a dozen different ways, and you know what? That's okay.
That would make me
That's the point. Sometimes things are just sad, and it's a matter of finding a way to sit with that sadness. It's not something to run from, or explain away, or repress. It's a fact. And it's sad, and we can let it be sad. Terry Pratchett gave us a version of death that he mulled over for decades and introduced to us like an old friend. He created an answer to a profound existential mystery that worked so well that it gave real, tangible comfort to real people facing it down. And it's impossible to know for sure, but maybe it even helped him when he faced the same thing. These stories are deeply cathartic, and catharsis is not the same thing as happiness. Catharsis is the process of passing through deeply intense emotions and experiencing a release on the other
Hmm.
side. Stories about death are also stories about life, and the writers that pull it off guide their audience through a journey that lets them sit with that sorrow and then reminds them that they're alive. Conveniently, this is just about the only thing an artist can reliably assume about their target audience. We are alive when we internalize these stories, when artists introduce us to their interpretation of what comes next. We sit with it, we feel what they feel, we let the sorrow get nice and comfy, and then we breathe, and we're still here. And we don't know for sure what, if anything, happens next, but we've gotten a little better at being okay with that. We tell these stories for a reason. It saves us from having to figure this all out from nothing. We don't need to reinvent the wheel every time we remember that it's turning. So, yeah.
Everybody, go down to the video description and you'll find the link so you can go and watch the original. Please, I would love for you to do so. Um, shit. Well, we got depressing Dell with the gravelly voice now. So, everybody, get out there, support the original. I normally I'd do an outro. Don't really feel like it. Very deep concept. Actually, you know what? No, be a professional YouTuber. Do that shit. We are gonna do an outro. Obviously, we're going to have the links and stuff in the description, support the originals. But at the same time, for myself, I'd like you to comment in the comment section how you feel and how you internalize death, or at least how you see it. I'd like for everyone here to, I don't know, I guess you could say you could like the video if you like what my opinions or how I describe things is. That'd be neat. Um, what else is there for me to talk about? Oh yeah, I have a bottomless link in the description will be my subscribe star. As usual, you can go out there and do that. What do you get from doing a subscribe star? Simple. You get, well, for $8, access to all videos in advance. You also have the ability to just, well, look. Sorry. Okay, I'm not trying to be yawning up in your ear, but it's a little bit late and a little bit of a saddy topic. Um, you also have the ability to just, I don't know, like, obviously you get the 3D renders, which is what I've been saying in other videos, right? You get the 3D renderings and shit, so you can go and watch the videos and that. And I also will be able to do pixel art for you. You get one of these things per month because I still got to work on other projects. But please have a lovely fucking day, everybody.